Welcome to Deep Treks. I'm Dan Shipton, and we're glad that you can join us for our Wednesday edition of Deep Treks Devotions. And we will be looking at the Gospel of Mark as we've been continuing the study of Mark leading up to the Easter season. And this week, especially, we're looking at the cross and the way of the cross, as Jesus has been declaring about going to the cross and what it means to follow him. And we're going to continue along that theme as the way of the cross takes us to humility in Mark chapter 9, verses 30 to 50. So I hope you can turn over there with us to Mark chapter 9, verse 30, and we're going to look at some verses here as we look at what God is telling us. Humility is not easy. It's not easy to humble ourselves. Sometimes we get very prideful, and there's nothing wrong with thinking that we're good in what we do, but sometimes we can get ahead of ourselves. And if you think we're the only ones that struggle with that, then you're wrong because the disciples struggled with it as well, and we're going to see that today. So, beginning at verse 30 of chapter 9, it says, "They went from there and passed through Galilee, and he did not want anyone to know." In other words, he didn't want anyone to know where he was. "For he was teaching his disciples, saying to them, 'The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him. And when he is killed, after 3 days, he will rise again.' But they didn't understand what he was saying, and they were afraid to ask him about it. So we've already talked about the fact that Peter didn't want him going on to Jerusalem, but now we're seeing as he's sharing with his disciples that none of them are really understanding this plan. It goes against what they thought. Well, this isn't the only problem that they're having. It says in verse 33, they came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, 'What were you discussing on the way?' But they kept silent, for on the way they were arguing with one another over who was the greatest. And he sat down and called the 12 to him." Boy, this is like, if you've ever had brothers and sisters, mom loves me more, dad loves me more. They're kind of going through this thing, but we really don't quite grasp this. It comes out more, I think, even more so when we see the account of Jesus where he's got his cousin's mom. James and John are his cousins, and their mom comes and says, "Which one of my sons can sit at your right hand," kind of thing. And that's really what this argument's about. It's not because they think they're the greatest here. They think that as he's going to establish his kingdom, because they're still not getting that he's going to die and that his whole reason for coming the first time was to forgive sins. So they just aren't getting this. And here they are arguing about who's going to be the best in the kingdom and who's going to get the highest seat and who's going to get the highest honor. And so he calls them to himself. And he's asking them what they're discussing, but he already knows because God knows all things. Jesus knows all things. And he says, "If anyone would be first, he must be last and all of all the servants." And he took a child and put him in the midst of them. And taking his arms, he said, "Whoever receives one such child in my name receives me. And whoever receives me receives not only me, but him who sent me." Jesus is reminding them it's not about being first in the kingdom. Our job is to serve. And he's basically saying, by bringing the child into the conversation, he's basically saying you need to be innocent, you need to be calm. You just need to be one who wants to learn, because those are the ones that are going to be the best in the kingdom of God, those that are hungry to learn, as a child would be hungry to learn. Well, Jesus continues on, and John says to him, "Teacher, we saw someone casting out demons in your name, and we tried to stop them because he wasn't following you." But Jesus said to him, "Do not stop him, for no one who does the mighty works in my name will be able to soon afterwards speak evil of me. For the one who is not against us is for us. For I truly say to you, whoever gives you a cup of water and to drink because you belong to Christ will by no means lose his reward. Whoever causes one of these little ones who believes in me to sin, it would be better for him to have a great millstone hung around his neck and be thrown into the sea. And if, after your hand causes you to sin, it should be cut off. It is better for you to be crippled in life than to have two hands and go into hell. The unquenchable fire, and your foot that causes you to sin, cut it off. It's better for you to enter life lame than to have 2 feet and be thrown into hell. And if your eye causes you to sin, tear it out. It's better for you to enter the kingdom of God with one eye than with two eyes and be thrown into hell. Where the worm does not die, the fire is not quenched. For everyone will be salted with fire, and salt is good. But if salt loses its saltiness, how will anyone make it salty again? Have salt in yourselves, and be at peace with one another. Now, I know this is a big section, but as we've already talked about, Jesus is talking about humility. He's talking about putting him first. He's talking about commitment to the cross. And all of this is about him leading up to the cross and preparing them for what it means to be committed. On one hand, they're arguing about who's the best. On another hand, they're arguing because somebody else is doing the work of Jesus, but they're not one of the 12. So, they're not special. So why are they doing this, Jesus? And he says, hey, stop it. If they're doing my work in my name, they can't be doing the wrong thing. It's a little like Paul saying, even if people aren't doing the right thing perfectly in proclaiming Christ, if they're not doing it the perfect way, even if they're proclaiming Christ, that's what matters. In the end, it matters that they're proclaiming the truth of God. And then he goes through and gives this addition by saying, if you cause somebody else to sin or you cause somebody else to fall, you're going to be held accountable for it. So it's better for you to examine your own life, judge yourself, and don't let yourself fall into sin. And I think that's a great lesson for us today as we're preparing to, as we're going through this study on the way of the cross. Being committed means examining yourself, judging yourself. We don't go around judging other people like John was saying, hey, look at so-and-so over there. He's not really following us. He's not one of the 12. So what? What about you, John? What about you in your life? And I have to look at myself and say, what about me? Am I doing the right things all the time? Because I don't want to cause someone else to stumble. I want them to grow in their faith. And so I have to be careful. And I have to look at my life. Now, Jesus uses hyperbole here. He's not saying we go cut our hands off or pull our eye out. He's using that as hyperbole to say it's better if you were to do that than to sin and cause others to follow you into sin. So it's better if you keep yourself on guard and you judge yourself strongly. Now, this is one area where I can honestly say sometimes we go beyond, and we as Christians or even as humans sometimes are our worst judge. But sometimes we do have to be harsh with ourselves. We have to be realistic and say, I'm not perfect. I'm not doing the right things all the time. And so to judge myself in the better way, I want to avoid sin. And sometimes that means being a little harder on myself. And there's nothing wrong with that. Now, we can take it to the extreme. You hear these weird stories like we get out of some backgrounds, traditional backgrounds where, people go around basically, they force themselves into a false humility of poverty, or they beat themselves or whatever. That's not what Jesus is saying here. He's basically saying, judge yourself deeply and hold yourself to a higher standard. That's what the commitment of the cross is all about. It's about putting Christ first. It's about telling others about Christ, and it's about following him and not doing our own thing and not doing our own way and not judging others because they aren't exactly in our church or our background or whatever. If they're focused on Christ, that's all that matters, that they know Jesus. And so we got to be a little better about how we judge. And instead of judging others, we should judge ourselves. The old saying, when you're pointing at somebody else, there's 4 fingers or 3 fingers pointing back at you, is very true. We should look at ourselves. And Jesus says in other places, pull the log out of your own eye instead of looking at a little speck of dust in your brother's eye. So I hope today, becoming like God and sharing Christ and following him is a part of who you are. I hope that you're learning this week as we're going through this whole idea of commitment and the cross, that it's about putting him first. And that sometimes means judging ourselves, watching ourselves, but not passing judgment on others because we have our own imperfectness to go through and judge. I hope that God blesses you today, and I hope that you grow in his understanding and that you can grow in him and become a great follower of him. May God bless you on the journey with Christ today.
That's today's Devo on Deep Treks. No matter how deep the questions or dark the doubts, there's always a path forward. Reach out at deeptreks.com with prayer needs or topics you'd like us to explore. Keep trekking. Renewal is never far away. Be blessed on the journey and bless others along the way.